Thanks everybody for coming today. This is it's a really special opportunity to have Professor Adrian Bejan here with us. I'm not going to do the proper introduction. I've left that role to my more illustrious colleague, Professor Jose Torrero, a longtime mentor of mine, and I think he has a very nice introduction prepared. I would just like to say that we do not have any fire drills planned for today, so if there is a fire, please just head out to the parking lot, which I think most of you would have arrived from. So with that, I will pass it over to Professor Jose Torrero to make the proper introduction. Thanks.
Okay. Well, I have to thank Tarek for giving me this opportunity to introduce such an illustrious guest, and it's a real honor and a great pleasure to introduce Professor Adrian Bejan. He's a J.A. Jones Distinguished Professor at the Department of Mechanical Engineering and Material Science at Duke University. And there's a long and illustrious career that I am not going to detail in much, but he got his PhD from MIT and his entire higher education there in 1975. And he, among many awards that he has received, is the 2018 Benjamin Franklin Medal from the Franklin Institute in the United States, which is a really important and coveted award. His contributions to thermodynamics and particularly the constructional law have been recognized by very many. He has received multiple honorary degrees and been invited to give distinguished lectures in a very broad range of disciplines. He is a member of the Academy of Europe and a fellow of multiple organizations all around the world. I have a particular privilege in being here introducing him because I consider Professor Bejan as an individual who actually indirectly formed me professionally. When I did my PhD, most of my work was based on scaling analysis and scaling analysis of thermal systems. I learned mostly from his books on convection and porous media. And through the years, I have had the opportunity to interact with many people. He mentions that he conceived his constructional law after listening to a talk by Ilya Prigogine in 1996. I happened to listen to a talk by Ilya Prigogine in 1995, and I was equally struck by this concept of randomness that didn't really fit with my mind, but clearly I didn't have the brilliance of mind to be able to construct something better than that. And not only that, through sabbatical, I got to interact quite a bit with one of his closest collaborators, Sylvie Lorente, and with whom he's published a number of papers. And therefore, and I have, I'm the closest thing that you could imagine, to an academic stalker. You will look into my bookshelves and you will find every single book that he has published, which are more than 15 of those. So, without any further ado, again, it is a great pleasure and honor, to be able to introduce Professor Adrian Bejan. What?
You just have to make the slides go.
I see. Okay, perfect.
Well, thank you, Jose, for the introduction, and thank you, Tarek, for the invitation to speak at the Open University today. I thought a great deal about what to put together, and you'll see shortly why I think this particular lecture is important. It comes from the idea that research and teaching are in fact one and the same thing, like the hand and the glove. And both of those things come from the art of questioning. that is not accepting automatically what you hear and what you read. Only at this stage in my life, I came to realize why questioning is so important, meaning the art of not being convinced or easy to convince. It is that I grew up under communism, where in the home things were spoken one way or explained one way, which was the complete opposite of what was in school or on the street. And this difference struck me as an invitation to think and to compare, and year after year to question the origin of that difference, but to question it quietly, because to question it loudly in the street was very, very dangerous. And this attitude of, as I said, questioning what comes your way, over the years, especially in the United States, where the difference was even more clear, the difference between, um, okay, being free and not being free, has led to what Jose described for you, a career of coming up with ideas that otherwise would have gone unnoticed. That's the title. Most of my lectures in the book Freedom and Evolution, although you'll see a few things that are newer than 4 years ago. And there's a lot to say on this kind of running track. So I selected for you 3 ideas. One is hierarchy, the other one is diversity, and the third is innovation. These are at once activities, but also features of the nature that is inside of us and around us. I'll get to them, to these titles very, very soon. So questioning. The first thing, in fact, I was questioning this when I was in middle school. One drawing is one drawing, but one is about the river delta, the other one about the human lung. And the surprise is that the drawing unites the animate with the inanimate. And this leads to the question of why is that? Don't we all know that geophysics is different than biology? So I'll get to the answer very soon. Here's another lesson from middle school. The circuit executed by water and nature. It is a wheel in the simplest description. This counterclockwise in the drawing. Water goes up through evaporation, it comes down condensation, it runs horizontally on landscape. It also runs vertically upward from the canopies of the trees. But on the land, water flows horizontally as animal locomotion, human life, vehicles, if you really think about it, are moving stuff from one place to another. So everything that moves is a river of something, and every single mover has configuration. It has shape and structure. Not only that, but all those drawings are never the same. They are constantly morphing. You'll see shortly the name for that is evolving, you see. And so once again, why? Why are these changing images everywhere? You have to admit it, that this is what we're observing. We're not observing sketches or still art, or in fact inundated by things that move and they change while moving. So this is now the beginning of the answer to why. And first of all, nothing moves unless it is pushed. And the pushing comes from power. The power comes from flow architectures. These are the drawings, man-made or animal, that function as engines, and those engines are ingesting streams of so-called energy, food, fuel, and other things, including solar heating. And these arrows drawn around those objects in the blue summarize the thermodynamics story about these flow architectures called engines. Incidentally, with credit being given to British engineers who worked with the dirty hands, making these original steam engines for 100 years before James Watt. Today, the world takes this kind of beast of burden for granted because it's so cheap. The watts that come from the electric outlet, most of my students have absolutely no interest in questioning where that power comes from. So I have to teach them. So nothing moves unless it is pushed. And the pushing, as you see in these drawings, comes from designs of untold diversity and multitude. And the work with the power is destroyed instantly for the purpose of moving something on the surface of the earth. So nature can be reduced to this drawing of two boxers in the ring. The engine that produces power, obviously by consuming a source of energy, and then the object that's moved against the opposition posed by the environment, moved one way on the landscape, in the green. I call this design engines and brakes. And meaning the whole world is in the rectangular box sketched with dashed line. The energy that comes in, say from a burning fire, that QH is equal to the same QH that's rejected to the cold sky eventually. And this is the conservation of energy, where the graphic picture of the first law of thermodynamics. The second law is hidden inside the box. It has to do with the fact that change has occurred one way. The object has moved from left to right. That horse, if you want to think about it, or the automobile, and that is the second law. The second law accounts for the phenomenon of irreversibility. And on the right-hand side, you see that everything you know about fits inside the rectangular box. And you mentioned Jose 1996. Actually, it was on September 1995 when I heard that Bejan say that this nature we admire is the result of ale ayacta est, throwing the dice. And I said, wait a second, I've been predicting these things without knowing that what I do contradicts the Nobel laureate. And that was in September 1995. It took me a year to publish this idea, which is the constructive law of evolution in nature. All those words I thought about before I wrote them. I wrote them this way because they are non-denominational. Inside this statement, you can fit, fluid flow, animal locomotion, logistics of all kinds, including economics. But in any case, it's about a flow system that is of finite size, meaning not a particle or subparticle. In order for it to persist in time, and that's the definition of a live state in thermodynamics, as opposed to the dead state, it must evolve. I'll get to the definition of evolution very soon, with freedom such that it provides greater access to what flows, to what moves. And at the bottom of the screen, a short video of the movie of a river basin being evolving on the floor of a laboratory. The movie tape runs from left to right, one way, and in time, the flow gets easier thanks to erosion. Erosion, in the sand that covers the floor of the lab is in fact the freedom that the floor architecture has, the freedom to rearrange its design toward greater access. So now, if you, first of all, evolution is a very old word. It was a word that was not invented in biology. It's a Latin word. The verb evolvere means to roll out, to roll forward. This word brings up the image of the childbirth, uh, the appearance of something that did not exist before, but is always in front of the mother, which is why natura means birth in Latin, and nature is associated with the concept of the model of everything. And so evolution literally means a sequence of changes in flow configuration in a perceptible direction of time, meaning that now is different than before. And then freedom is a collection of physical features. Think about the erosion, the grains of sand that allow a system to change. No freedom, no evolution. Uh, in fact, speaking of the steam engine, the the simplest design is a cylinder with a piston that moves in and out. The position of the piston is 1 degree of freedom. Without that single degree of freedom, there is no engine, and there is no work and no power. But of course, engineering and society developed mightily based on that knowledge, without acknowledging that inside of it, at this most fundamental level of knowledge, freedom was the word, or should have been part of the description. And now, the bullets that I promised in the beginning, I start with this one out of sequence. Um, Here is a lot more to question. Uh, all animals are moving, but they are moving differently. Why is it that no matter where you look, in the air, on land, and in the water, the bigger are faster. The bigger animals are also moving their bodies at lower frequency compared with the smaller animals. These tendencies are listed on the right-hand side. And if one proceeds in life with a constructed law in his or her mind, it's easy to figure out why this happens. Um, think of a flying bird in the upper left hand corner. Um, a bird in cruising flight, meaning constant speed, constant altitude. Well, that's a simple description. The bird actually is executing a zigzag motion, which is indicated under the flying bird, because the bird has weight. The bird tends to fall. Therefore, the flyer must lift itself, and that work is called WY. And then the same body must get the environment out of the way in order to have access horizontally. That second work is called WX. And what really matters to the bird that is constantly struggling to find food to power itself is the average penalty of those two efforts, WY and WX, per unit of distance traveled. And from the search, meaning on the back of an envelope, of the balance between those two efforts, W, from that comes the power to predict everything that I showed you on the previous slide. What emerges, of course, is the formula for the relationship between speed and body size for flyers and for swimmers. So the medium has a role in the answer that emerges. But what nature does, in addition to agreeing with the predictions, nature strikes us with diversity. The fact that the measurements of speeds versus body size are diverse. They tend to hug the predictions the way that the hot dog hugs the obscure. Um, uh, Land animals are halfway between swimmers and flyers. You see that in between, if you think of, say, an animal running in soft snow or in mud, more like a fish or a snake, and then another one like Usain Bolt running on a smooth surface um, against the wind, you see, wind being the stationary atmosphere. Okay, so the balancing of the two efforts, Wy and Wx, that ratio is the degree of freedom that the animal feels, as it is most likely capable of feeling the difference between difficult and easy. And you see that combination of two efforts on this square graph. On the vertical is the total effort. On the horizontal is the speed at which the moving is occurring. By the way, the speed is another way of expressing the balance between the two efforts, because there's only one degree of freedom in this example. And the curve, which is shaped like a bucket, has a minimum. It corresponds to a so-called optimum speed. I call that a unique design perfection. And in my most recent journal article on it, I show that perfection never happens. In other words, if nature were fixated on perfection, there would be no evolution, and certainly no diversity. And the diversity, meaning the origin of it, lies in the shape of the curve, which indicates that in the vicinity of perfection, there are many ways of flying, meaning speeds, that provide the mover with essentially the same level of performance. So all the flyers in the band of diverse designs are offering the same degree of let's call it economic lifestyle for the animal. Next hierarchy is another aspect that's of nature which is undeniable. It comes from economies of scale. A very simple exercise in the upper left corner. Think about two streams of water. Sorry, one stream of water flowing through two identical tubes. Obviously, it takes pumping power to force that stream to go through those openings. It turns out that the pumping power is much reduced if the same stream flows through a single pipe with a volume that equals the sum of the previous two. So if you remember the constructor law, then nature should have the tendency to change its configuration from flowing along two channels in parallel, flowing through a single channel that's bigger. And that means a change from 2 to 1. Well, if that is so, meaning before you, Adrian, congratulate yourself, why is it that nature is not filled by objects of one size, each of which is a big size? And the reason is that the movement on Earth is not between 2 points, as in the upper left-hand corner. It is between 1 point and an area, meaning from a source to a territory that's to be bathed, or from a territory from which stuff such as grain must be collected to 1 point, or say rainfall on the plain must exit the area through 1 point called the mouth of the river. And so the geometry of fluid flow or movement in nature is more complicated. It connects one to an infinite number of places, and that means that the channels, if they were big, they could not bathe the territory completely. big channels form big armpits between them. And those armpits define smaller areas, of course, on which big channels are the solution, except that the big channel for the smaller area turns out to be a smaller channel compared with the original size channels that define the smaller territories. And from there arrives the design that's hierarchical, meaning an area covered by few large and many small. And then if you get an interest in the history of everything that flows on Earth, in this case, human movement, also known as city living. Here's the distribution of size versus number of channels and versus number of channels. The distribution of the city sizes and numbers in Europe over the history of recent history of Europe. The city rank, one is the biggest to the left, and then the number, meaning the size of the flow system, meaning the size of the city is plotted on the ordinate. And the distribution is essentially a straight line on log versus log graphics. The distribution is known empirically as a zip distribution. However, with a construct below, as shown in this book, Freedom and Evolution, one could predict this distribution on the back of an envelope. Another example of this kind is the distribution of numbers and sizes of tree canopies on the landscape. I mentioned earlier that trees are in fact pumping water from the wet soil into dry wind. If you if you know the secret that trees like water, quote unquote, because they're in fact the water pumps, just like the big animals. Big animals are found in places where there is a heavy or abundant rainfall, because animals are water trucks, moving water from here to here. All those new ideas come together under this form of hierarchy, which is that seen from above, the big canopies are few, and the smaller and smaller are more and more numerous, with their own zip distribution, this time predicted by myself with two colleagues, on the same kind of plot of rank, size, and this versus, numbers on the abscissa versus size on the ordinate. It doesn't matter how you postulate the arrangement of these canopies in triangular arrangements or square. It doesn't matter. What matters is the fact that the distribution is insensitive to geometric selection of the how you make the drawing. And then most familiar when it comes to hierarchy movement on the surface of the earth is the movement of people. In the upper left-hand corner, an area covered by travelers through an airport, in this case Atlanta, which was opened in 1955. It's a movement of two kinds, fast and slow. The fast is a single train. The slow are several concourses vertically oriented shown in blue. And the description of the movement is that what really works and what emerges naturally, not only in the Atlanta airport, but on any city block, is that of the same people moving as few large, meaning one train, and many small, or few fast and many slow, and few traveling long, and the same ones going as many traveling short. That's for people on the left. Freight, the same idea. The same freight is vehicled on the territory by a few large, in this case, trucks, unloading or loading from many smaller trucks that go slowly and short transversely. And the this way we know what the origin or the natural origin of the other hierarchy, in this case animal realm, known as the food chain. The predators are bigger and flying fast and long, and living, yes, in harmony with others, smaller, moving slower transversely. Here's another way to look at the hierarchy of animal movement. I plotted, these are all flyers, with body size on the horizontal and numbers of moving bodies on the vertical. The small, the insects are innumerable, and then traveling with your imagination to the right, the biggest are very few. In fact, the bigger they are, the fewer they are. These flying carpets called airplanes. I made those drawings, and I put them in this descending diagonal because on a log-log plot, they fall on the same zip distribution that you saw for cities and tree canopies in the forest. So yes, hierarchy is something that happens naturally. The one size is, if it is imposed or forced, is unnatural and designed, destined not to have staying power. So that's the conclusion at this stage. I arrive once again at diversity, which is, as you'll see shortly, connected with hierarchy. Animals, they're all different, but they're categorized as felines and birds and obviously fish. But I decided to make these drawings to be of the same size because clearly the cat is much smaller than the elephant, you see. But when you make the drawing, all the drawings the same size, you are struck by, how should I say, you are challenged by new questions that arrive in your mind. The drawings look different. Look at the cat and the lion. They're both felines, but the cat has tiny legs. The lion has much bigger legs. And it turns out that if you, again, start from the construct the law and the believable feature of the animal, that the animal knows the difference between the easy and difficult, you can show that the bigger the animal, it is easier if the motor organ, called the legs, occupies a bigger fraction of the body or the size of the animal. And you see it, of course, exaggerated in the case of elephant. And much more obvious in the swimmers. A small fish has a distinct tail and flippers. The bigger the fish, the more of the body is undulating like a snake, meaning it's a tail, all the way to the biggest of all of them, which is all fish-like movement. If you watch the movies of whales, you'll see that they are swimming. They don't need really flippers. You see this also in the evolution of the sport of freestyle and swimming. The faster and faster swimmers, the ones who break records, in fact, records are being broken frequently in the 100-meter freestyle. The swimmer, yes, the swimmer is paddling, but the swimmer is also doing what the whale does. It's body length fishtailing through the water. And that's how the sport evolves. And one way to get a feel for evolution in nature is to get interested in watching athletes and watching sports and how these movies in your own lifetime teach evolution to the uneducated. The other obvious thing is that people are not the same. They don't look the same. And I took an interest in this kind of movie, and I decided to present it graphically. Here's where this diversity called humanity comes from. In this case, from left to right. Yes, the Homo came from Africa, everybody knows, but it came in spurts. The first migration was roughly 2 million years ago. It was northward from Africa into Europe. That was the first branch moving up. And then that coincided with the adoption of fire. And then there was a second migration. There was a migration of not only the sapiens, but also other related species called hominids, Neanderthals and Denisovans. They all migrated north and east. And they migrated coincidentally at a time when clothing was acquired. Obviously, clothing was necessary in order to move toward higher latitudes. And then there was another event called boating, another artifact that enabled these migrants to run into each other and interbreed. The first act of interbreeding at this point in time, which is almost yesterday, 100,000 years ago, led to the first mixture called the Melanesians, who spread all over the Pacific. And then the second was an interbreeding of the first mixture with the Neanderthals, led to the European type, also known as the Middle Eastern type. And then the third interbreeding, only 30,000 years ago, was between the Middle Eastern type and the other hominids, and giving birth to the East Asian type. So modernity, meaning what we study as history in schools, is only 100,000 years old, and it comes with these varied flows of humanity, and you see them continuing to the right on the abscissa, the many inventions for artifacts that empower this movement. Important, by the way, is to go back to the previous chart and recognize that the movement, geographic movement, was driven by power, and every jolt, any increase in power, because obviously the naked human is more powerful with fire than without fire. Fire, clothing, and boating led to the spreading of humanity on the globe, to the phenomenon that we can all observe today. And so that's the history. Another way to look at it is that artifacts are the reason for advancement. I made this chart to account for everything else that I showed you. The naked human is the one, the hand drawn by Da Vinci on the left. Then came the naked human equipped with a tool that's a facsimile of the hand. The tool did not replace the hand. In nature, what works is kept. In this case, the naked hand works, and so does the tool. And today, with all this hype about AI, you can be sure that, once again, what works is kept, or will be kept. And so proceeding to the right, we have a much more interesting story to tell, to recognize and tell, which is called this activity of coming up with artifacts known as innovation. Here's one snapshot of it, the evolution of boats with sail. On the upper row, from the left, that's the Egyptian galley, and then in the middle is one of the ships of Columbus. And then the last one is one of the ships of Napoleon's navy. It's essentially the same design, a horizontal hull equipped with sails. The design evolved over time toward capturing the wind better with a lighter and lighter assembly of solid parts. And that led to, yes, the evolution of forget about sailing, it's about transportation of stuff on the surface of the ocean. Faster, and obviously faster meant economical from many points of view. In other words, you come up with the time arrow, and this guy is predictable from an idea. Time arrow that not only the direction of those boats, but also the direction in which changes have occurred. And that leads to this aha, which is that what moves more easily, that means more powerfully, has nowhere to go except over a territory that's covered by less movement. This happens during every single flood, but also happened with the case of big ships with sails. They came from where the ships with sails had evolved as a technology, and I made this drawing tendentiously, pointing from east to west, and it came across the Atlantic from this direction to the other, not in the opposite direction. So, if you know, from my little story, the origin and importance of innovation, you know how to predict the future of that movement on the globe. It is from greater movement to lesser movement, because movement is distributed non-uniformly on the surface of the earth. Today is the same story. It's not sailing, it's aviation. This is a picture, cannot be contradicted, this picture of from satellites of the distribution of condensation trails left behind all flying aircraft at a particular point in time. This is the so-called steam you see condensing in the wakes of jet aircraft. And you see that the movement is most intense in the places where aviation was in fact invented. You see that in Europe and North America. Today, the entire globe is flying. From any spot on the globe, you can reach any other spot on the globe. That is from blue to blue. But sooner or later, just like the red blood cells in the human body, the red blood cells have to pass through the chambers of the heart. And aviation is an organism with a heart with two chambers. And that animal will not change constitution. It will develop bigger channels, meaning thicker channels with greater flow rates, and maybe a few other, maybe new organs, such as in the Far East. But aviation is a flow architecture with this easy to describe origin, if you know the history of technology, which dates back to the Industrial Revolution. What we take from this picture is that the movement on Earth is hierarchical, few large and many small. Obviously, the consumption of fuel on Earth is hierarchical. Naturally, no one has decreed that the movement has to be this way. It happened, you see, because all movers eventually move together. Every single one voting with his, money while purchasing an airline ticket, voting for what is easier for for the individual who buys the ticket. And so fuel use is hierarchical, and as you'll see next, wealth itself is hierarchical. On the left-hand side, I plotted, this is now an empirical presentation with the facts, quote unquote. On the left side, I plotted the fuel used annually by a country on the horizontal versus the wealth reported for that country annually. That's the gross domestic product. Surprisingly, to some, but not to me, the two measures are in fact proportional. They're in a one-to-one relationship, very much like the picture with the speeds of birds versus body size. In this case, there's a cloud. The cloud is relatively thin, and at the top of the cloud, meaning wealthiest and biggest consumers of power, are the usual suspects, the advanced countries. What's interesting here is that all these dots, from one year to the next, are racing upward. They're racing upward like the cyclists in the Tour de France. That tendency is undeniable. And what you hear, what you read, is the success story of every dot that has moved. What you don't hear is that hand in hand with the greater wealth comes the consumption of fuel. In other words, to retain from this picture is the red arrow, which points, just like in the slide with the constructor wall, toward the future, which means the arrow of evolutionary design in nature. The same points are plotted on this graph in a slightly different way. On the ordinate is the annual consumption of fuel, which is synonymous with wealth. And on the abscissa is the economic freedom. The rank number one for that is in this corner. The less free are to the right. The dots are moving upward. And you see that the world, when it comes to movement versus freedom, is of two kinds. At the very top, the usual suspects, and Britain belongs in this upper echelon, of course. And then the rest, as I said, racing upward, are racing upward, I would say, unwittingly, because upward is better. So the time arrow is the same from one graph to the next. What about the thickness of the cloud? This is the slide that ends up bringing home the concept of innovation. I plotted here wealth per capita annually, not for the whole country, but just per capita. And here on the abscissa, the consumption of fuel per capita. And educational here is to take a look in the vertical direction. For example, in line with the fuel per capita fuel consumption of the Russian citizen. You go up, and you find that the Russian citizen is consuming the same amount of fuel annually as the Japanese and the American. But there's a huge difference between those two levels when it comes to wealth, a factor of 20. In other words, per unit of fuel burned, the American and Japanese creates 20 times greater movement, which means wealth. And movement, once again, comes from artifacts, acts of innovation, which begin with ideas before they become objects that the individual attaches to himself or herself. So these words on the left, from freedom, obviously to question, freedom to act, freedom to implement. One has innovation, and then a whole list of features of life that are attractive. teachers that come with questions of their own. Security. Security is a very, very important word. And it is, of course, used by in two ways. Um, there are governments that promise safety, security for a population by keeping it safe from the outside, meaning by building walls and frontiers with barbed wire. That's one kind of security. But the dictionary defines security as the human feeling of not living in fear. That is security. Feeling secure. And with that come all these other things that are a lot easier to comprehend when question that's physics. Here's another look at not only what will happen in the future, but this is another tendentious drawing of what is to be derived from my lecture. If a country reads my book and wishes to become wealthier or living better, instead of proceeding along the diagonal, like Russia and Kazakhstan, Azerbaijan, all these former places from the USSR, that country where that population would be better off, it's just like in sports. If you are on a team and you want to get better, you are well advised to pay attention to those players who are on better teams and see what they do, and then try to do what they do. And in other words, educate yourself or invite others to educate you their way so that you too could proceed vertically upward toward greater movement while using the same amount of fuel per capita annually. And so that's one of the recent papers that we published. So with that semi-punchline in order, then we get to the last segment, which is about the evolution of science itself. Obviously, science evolves because there are people who ask questions freely. My specialty is thermodynamics, which from the first slide that covers everything because nothing moves unless it is pushed. The pushing comes from power, and then the chain. That's the thermodynamics. In the history of the subject speaks of freedom to question and freedom to implement, or freedom to act. From left to right. 300 years ago, thinkers and doers had figured out how to make life easier. And the science of it was divided into two ways of thinking or accounting for nature. One was about the movement of easy to perceive objects such as vehicles, carts, animals pulling the carts, catapults throwing projectiles over the ramparts. That's called mechanics. It was all in the hand. In fact, from antiquity, the rope and the pulley, these are very old mechanisms. And then the burning fire and the boiling of things, and all these so-called thermal effects from the work of alchemists, and these you've seen the paintings of these people. Caloric theory was born. So these are two disciplines, very successful. Both of them successful. And what about the different aspects of nature? And then, thanks to the steam engine new questions appeared, and the steam engine was an object in which both the mechanical movement was present, but also the burning of the fire was present, and the boiling and the expansion, all of these things. And that led to the new science of thermodynamics. And by the way, caloric theory did not die, contrary to those who proclaim that caloric theory was put to death by thermodynamics. It was known as heat transfer, which is what Jose mentioned during the introduction. That was brought into thermodynamics or thermal sciences relatively recently. The work that I presented for you today is about another phenomenon that has been in place in science from the start, even before Greek geometry. It is about the science of design, the science of drawings. And then in my lectures about the fact that those drawings in nature are actually moving, they are morphing, they are evolving, all the way to from drawing to painting to cinema. And with the constructor law, design is joining the other two streams. It's like three trains pulling into the same station. So that is the evolution of science, in this case, with the example from thermodynamics. The changes from left to right were not a continuum, not like water flowing through pipes. Every step is associated with the name of one individual. You can see these names in the better written books. The individual wrote in a particular language, published at a particular point in time, and he or she did that in a particular place on Earth. And if you pay attention to those facts, you see that the innovation happened and continues to happen not uniformly on Earth. And it happens in places and in cultures that encouraged and then protected the ability of the individual to come up, first of all, to question and then come up with new ideas. That is the history of what we take for granted today, which is called science, and from that, technology. And then to students who are next in line to do something good for themselves and the following generations, this is what's going on when it comes to new ideas and implementing them. Marching columns do not climb peaks. The peaks are climbed by those who run away, who do not join. The ones who frankly don't care, they end up being the ones who practice disturbing ideas, who actually may get fired. They may suffer, but they're the ones who have the audacity to do something for themselves, of course, but in the book I show that every innovation benefits the entire society, not only the innovator. You see that? So that's the conclusion from my brief introduction to this piece of work. By the way, these photographs should be familiar to you. Once again, I'm the artist, so I can tell you how I came up with these things. In the middle is the German army marching in 1939 before it decided to invade Europe west and then east. The other one is the equivalent, in my opinion, which is the so-called People's Liberation Army in communist China, celebrating that regime annually and marching in a way that leads individuals, the few of them, to run away from the marching column, or to break the cadence, if you want another metaphor. Here's a summary of my most recent books in which I illustrated my own evolution while playing with this idea. The story of today is in human evolution, but this way of thinking has a much longer history. The incident with Prigozhin was just a spark which led to the invention of this word constructal. But when I was a student, I was 8 years at MIT. Thermodynamics was a vibrant discipline in that school. And at that time, my professors were seeing it's called marriage, a marriage that had to be consummated between thermodynamics and economics. And the name for that discipline that was being promoted was thermal economics. And to Adrian, the student, it was the hint that in thermodynamics something was missing, something that was very important for the human being, because economy is about living better, which means living more wisely. And so this let's call it like I was smelling a perfume of something that's present but inexplicable, that was with me from the 70s. And then only later occurred to me that what was missing was this acknowledgement of the fact that the objects of thermodynamics were not still drawings or black boxes. They were in fact the things that I have been showing you, drawings that are actually movies. And every single moving object has a story of its own, and when seen from above, that story is the same and comes the same way from every single mover. And that's the story of predictable evolution in nature. Thank you.